presenter. So
okay, so you are okay. Chandradeo Bokhoree,
yeah,
yes.
I've just been listening to Yaroslava with regards to the tourism impacts that's happening, and her focus was certainly within the country where she stands, hopefully. Myself from an island, from Mauritius, which is a highly touristic destination, and lots of tourism impacts on island states. So lots of tourism impacts also prevails in mountainous regions, and loads of studies which are already being undertaken, and lots of studies remains to be undertaken when it comes to understanding the real tourism impacts which are happening around the world. Not to forget that tourism by itself plays a very important economic contribution for the development of countries around the world. And as a matter of fact, the impact that it causes, there could be positive contributions, there could also be negative contributions, so negative impacts. So the contribution that tourism as a sector around the world is causing in many countries remains to be properly assessed. So just as a comment from my side, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bokhoree. And I guess it's your turn. So we go to Mauritius, don't we?
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
It's quite difficult problems in especially mountains.
Indeed. Particularly for those where the scenic views and the attractive characteristics of mountainous regions contributes towards having loads of tourists visiting them. And that's where, if we don't properly have proper planning to attract tourists and how to cater for tourism requirements, then definitely will be bound to facing lots of impacts that we are undesirable in. Good.
Thanks.
So yes, Chair. Thank you. Let me first of all share my screen.
Yes. We are almost there.
Right. Just to confirm, please confirm if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Right. So thank you, Chair. A very good morning or afternoon to all those listeners out there. As per what I can see on the list, I think we are around 58 or so right now. And thank you, Hasrat, for giving us this platform to share a bit of our knowledge to all those listeners. And I was made to understand most of them happens to be students. So hopefully the students are out there, although the cameras are off. We are all living in a COVID situation and learning online. And certainly for such type of conference sessions. So hopefully you're gaining a lot. My topic for today, which I'm going to focus upon, relates to sustainability assessment. What are the tools and techniques when it comes to sustainable mountain development? So let me give a brief with regards to what is sustainability assessment and where I'm going to lead this presentation today. So lots of developments are happening around the world. And certainly lots of debates are also ongoing when it comes to sustainable practices when we are developing or we are urbanizing regions. And certainly not only mountainous regions, but it also based on any other countries, island states, developed countries as well, when they are involved in high urban development activities. So the buzzwords, sustainable development, sustainability, and today we are focusing upon the SDG goals, which started in 2015. Earlier, we were focusing on MDG goals, the Millennium Development Goals, which had a mandate up to 2015. And why so? In 15 years, from 2000 till 2015, when MDG started, when we had those goals that were approved internationally, and countries were called upon to meet and to achieve such goals, why today we are moving towards, from 2015 to 2030, another era where we are expecting future goals in the form of SDGs to be achieved? And why so much debates are ongoing? And hopefully you're all aware COP26 is coming very soon in Glasgow. So why so many debates and so many sessions of work where representatives from countries are joining hands together and to move ahead in having consensus in mitigating or even adapting to issues in relation to climate change, for example. Why so many things are happening? One of the lacunas that exists around the world today happens to be, how do we assess our contributions? How do we assess our progress? How do we assess our development? So the buzzword sustainability, sustainable development have been there for years now and for decades. And today, I think it's high time for us to really value the need for proper assessment. We cannot move towards sustainable measures when we cannot measure our progress. So like the earlier presenter mentioned, lots of tourism impacts are happening. So it's good to understand the economic impact. It's good to understand the social impact. It's also good to understand the environmental impact that the tourism sector is causing, for example. So, and then we can come up with solutions. We can come up with measures that we can mitigate those impacts. But how can we do that if we don't assess? How are we going to know how the progress is? And that's where sustainability assessment comes in. And that by itself, it's not only dependent for mountainous regions, but it's also very useful for island states where I am from Mauritius. And for those who are not aware, where's Mauritius? So it's good for me to mention it to you, though I don't have it on the slide. It's a small, tiny island in the form of a dot, just next to a big island called Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. And a very lovely island. And certainly our population size is somewhere around 1.2 million right now. And we are also faced with COVID. And we are also facing with regards to getting ourselves vaccinated and to have our businesses back to normal. So when we are trying to get our businesses back to normal, we are trying to get our economy back to normal. Even in other countries, they're trying to do that. How do we, as from now, when we speak about the new normals, how can we progress positively? And that's where assessment helps us understand this. So let me share to you on my next slides to you. So certainly, so far, when we refer to sustainability assessment by itself, there are also challenges, implications and challenges. I hope you're able to see my screen. Please confirm.
No, we don't see.
Sorry.
So you should share again, please.
Yes, is it okay now?
Yes, it's better.
Yeah, thank you. So when it comes to sustainability assessment, so what are the tools or techniques that exist? And those tools and techniques behind them, do we have methodologies? And if yes, what are the implications and challenges? So the focus of my presentations for today will be mainly towards understanding the different tools that exist around the world. We are not inventing the wheel again. The tools are here. Maybe the tools are complex, and it's good to understand what are those tools. At least we have a list of those tools, and understand the difficulties in understanding them and applying them. So very quickly, I think everybody has, since last Sunday till today, you have been growing up in terms of understanding really that based on the human activities that we are all involved in, including us right now in doing this presentation and you're listening. So we are involved in exerting pressure on our natural ecosystem. Not to forget, the whole world existed for millions of years back. Human was not even there. And human today is considered only as an invitee on the planet Earth. So the natural ecosystem were there, the planet Earth, the blue planet Earth were there. Human came in, and we should also consider ourselves as an invitee. So on one side, we have the natural ecosystem. On the other side, we have the human, us as human beings. And the activities that we have been involved with for centuries till today, those activities, to what extent they have put pressures on the natural ecosystem, that's what has been provoking words like sustainability and sustainable developments. And the effects, when we talk about the impacts that the human activities have been causing, relates mainly towards the natural environment, relates mainly towards the economic development in terms of how we have been developing alongside down the line. And it also relates towards our social implications. We as humans, certainly with time, we have developed, we have grown up in the form of society. And how that society has evolved from time to time till today. And whether that society has been progressively moving ahead in a positive way. These are the three different dimensions, which I'm sure lots of you knows it and have heard it in the past already. And when we speak about the term sustainable development, it mainly relates to the three dimensions. So when we are assessing our progress, when we're assessing our development, it's also good to understand how assessment is done, how assessment contributes in those three dimensions as well. So I'm going to skip this one because I'm sure everybody has come across this with regards to the definition of sustainable development. That's good. We have mentioned about the definition in relation to the Bretton report way back in 1987, which happens to be the very first definition in history of humanity when it comes to sustainable development, written down in the literature. But down the line with time till today, we have loads of definitions from different angles, from different perceptions. It can be at corporate level, it can be at societal level, it could be at country level. So loads of definitions with time, depending on the needs of the human beings, depending on the sphere where we stand. So that definition has evolved accordingly till today. And when we refer to system assessment, like I was mentioning earlier, effective, definitely, what type of assessment are we aiming at? So if we are moving towards progress, which are positively considered, then we should also understand how we are assessing that progress positively, either in the short term or in the long term. Because by definition of the term sustainability by itself, whatever we are doing right now should have positive implications for future generations ahead, that is in the long run. But when we are assessing, that assessment can be done now to understand how whatever we are producing, whatever we are developing, how we are urbanizing ourselves in the form of activities. When I refer to activities, it's any human activities, including human activities in mountainous regions. So when we are analyzing those activities and we are assessing those activities, it can be now, it can be for in the short term, in terms of assessment, in terms of outcome, what can happen, and it can also be in the long run. But in the long run, certainly assessment has some implications in terms of getting proper data to assess. So around the world, definitely, with time, there are lots of tools that have come into play. And why? Because assessing sustainability by itself is complex, which I'm going to shortly give you a list of tools that you will have an idea why so much tools exist around the world. But behind them, we also have frameworks, we also have methodologies. How can we assess based on data that we collect? So when we are carrying out assessment, not to forget that any assessment that we want to carry out, it's also based on the type of data that we collect. So the three dimensions that I was referring earlier, also alongside with time today, we are also taking into consideration the mere fact that technology has contributed and is also already contributing a lot in the progress of urbanization. So technologically speaking, economically speaking, environmentally speaking, to what extent assessment can be done? And that assessment requires data. And the data itself, how do we gather, how do we collect the data, and how do we analyze the data? So to help us, certainly, we have lots of methodologies that exist in the literature. Lots of methodologies and lots of frameworks and lots of models that exist in the literature that can help us. When I refer to frameworks or methodologies or models, certainly then it's good to understand that how we are able to assess, to which level are we able to assess. So per se, for example, we can assess our progress towards sustainable practices and sustainable development at country level. That is, any country involved with developments for years and years and years. For those who are very well familiar, we have as an indicator, for example, gross domestic product, the GDP. Many countries around the world use GDP as an indicator to measure their progress. But GDP by itself, unfortunately, doesn't really measure the real progress of a country when it takes into consideration environmental performance, the social performance, and the economic performance of that country. Unfortunately, GDP by itself doesn't do that, unless the country by default incorporates additional indicators or additional factors of contributions in those three dimensions. So certainly when we refer to systems assessment, it can be done at country level, it can be done at corporate level, it can be done at societal level. And how those assessments are being carried out in the literature right now, by the time I'm speaking, lots of tools which have been developed. I should say many of them which started way back in the 90s till today. Lots of them contributes towards analyzing at corporate level their progress. So let me go down in terms of the slide that I'm projecting right now. Let me go down in explaining the different scale or the different level where such tools which have been developed today exist. So we can assess the sustainability of product to start with. So that is, for example, if we are offering tourism in the tourism sector, if we are offering services by itself, and we have products involved in terms of use that we can use to offer that service. So those products by themselves, are they sustainable enough? Or can we measure their positivity when it comes to sustainable practices through the use of such products? So we can assess sustainability through product-related items. We can assess sustainability through projects. The projects could be, for example, construction of a building. The project could be in the form of construction of infrastructures, public infrastructures. So we can assess the progress of such projects depending on certain criteria. We can also assess progress. We can also assess the sustainability progress at sectorial level. Sectorial level could be, for example, the last presenter relates towards the tourism sector. So we can assess the tourism sector of countries. Island states like Mauritius, for example, which are dominant. The tourism sector happens to be one of the pillars of the Mauritian economy, so which contributes somewhere around 25% easily of the gross domestic product for the country. So certainly, such a sector by itself, if we want to measure its own sustainability progress, then certainly we do have tools to do that. And also we can also measure sustainability at country level, as I have already mentioned earlier. So in the literature, there are lots of tools that exist. I have listed them, some of them definitely. You will see, starting with the Lifecycle Assessment, which is a very nice tool, which measures lots of measurements which are being done around the world today through the use of using LCA, the Lifecycle Assessment, for measuring the sustainability of products, to understand how products from the time when it started to be developed through the use of raw materials until its usage, involving transportation for it to be used, until it's being set in the landfill as a waste, or it's being recycled as any other means. If we refer to the presentation that was held before the last presenter, where we were referring to how solid waste is being managed. So certainly products that we are consuming today, if you really understand that product by itself, how it got developed and how it's being utilized and how it's being discarded away once it becomes an obsolete material. So how do we carry out, how do you understand the assessment, how we can do the assessment of such a product to understand the stability of such a product in terms of its usage, in terms of its production, in terms of its usage, and in terms of its when we're discarding it. So that's where LCA as a tool can come into play, can help us to do that. We also have other tools definitely which can help to assess product level requirements. Then, for example, I have another tool that I've mentioned over there, which is a Dow Jones Sustainability Index, a very worldwide tool, which is being used, including the New York Stock Exchange, which uses this particular tool massively. So the Jones Sustainability Index is a tool which helps to measure, for example, at corporate level, how corporates in particular sectors are operating, how they're progressing, how they're progressing when it comes to their corporate sustainability actions. And certainly countries are called upon to adopt sustainable practices. So without the support of the private sector, so without the support of corporates in those respective countries, including Mauritius as an island state, so we cannot measure progress. We cannot move towards sustainable practices at large. So corporates are called upon to add value, to enhance their activities, whether it is in the form of production or whether it is in the form of providing services. So they're called upon to measure their progress. So one way to do so, and one way to measure them happens to be, for example, through the use of the Jones Sustainability Index. So just to let you know now, the Jones Sustainability Index happens to be one of those index which is used in the New York Stock Exchange, for example. Why? Because those stock exchange around the world that exists, including the one in Mauritius, they also promote sustainable practices. And for them to promote sustainable practices, they are using today indices which help them to measure the progress of listed companies in their stock exchange. As a requirement, companies are bound to adopt the requirements of, for example, the Jones Sustainability Index to be able to measure their progress. By default, it's happening today. There is a great momentum around the world in the form of progress when it comes to corporate sustainability. Next, we also have environmental sustainability index that exists, which has been developed in the literature, which is mainly a tool which is used to measure progress at country level. So yes, definitely. So why so much tool exists, whether it is at product level, or project level, sector level, or country level, because of the specificities, because of the types of data that we require to collect, to analyze, to assess accordingly through the use of certain methodologies behind such tools that I'm referring right now. So that's why you have different tools and being focused upon different scale accordingly. So likewise, definitely, if you go down the list, I'm not going to go in all of them, but just to give you an indication, if I take, for example, the next one, the following one, which is Human Development Index, HDI, which I hope everybody has heard in the past. Human Development Index by itself tries to measure progress of how human beings are progressing. And Human Development Index is a measure at country level. So certainly the methodology that exists behind helps to measure at country level how that society, in that particular country are progressing. And if we focus on it, then definitely we will understand the big difference in terms of outcome that HDI provides, and when we are actually using, for example, GDP as a measure of progress, of economic progress of the country. There are big disparities that could prevail when we are using such type of indices in comparison to GDP. Ecological footprint, that's another measure. Ecological footprint, which started, which appeared in the literature way back in 1995 till today, massively being used. So just to give you all an indication in terms of ecological footprint, ecological footprint by itself tries to measure whatever activities we're doing on planet Earth and the footprint that we're keeping on the planet Earth. What are the resources that we require to properly carry out those activities? For example, right now, we are all connected globally, though we are all utilizing energy. And certainly we are supposed to be producing that energy. What are the raw materials that we are in need to produce that energy for us to be able to communicate right now through this platform? And most probably we are using our iPad, our tablets, our desktop, and to produce such type of materials, that's where the footprint is coming. So whatever activities we are undertaking and the resources that we require, and we need raw materials to produce them. So we need those raw materials from the planet Earth itself. The footprint that we're keeping, that's ecological footprint. And certainly, as matters stand today, just to give an indication, planet Earth is one. We have lots of resources which are finite, and unfortunately, we are depleting those resources. There are lots of resources which are renewable, so they get renewed depending on a time factor. If we allow those resources to be renewed, accordingly, where matters stand today, based on an average criteria around the world, if we consider ourselves somewhere around nearly 7 billion people around the world today, if we consider on an average basis, we require more than one planet to sustain all the activities that the human beings are carrying out on this planet right now, as matters stand. So those who are involved in conducting ecological footprint analysis, and it exists in the literature already, if you go online, you just type it, you will see it already. We require more than one planet Earth to sustain all the activities that we as human beings are doing. So in another way, for us to accommodate all the activities that we are able, and we are enjoying those activities and the resources, somewhere someone is paying the price for it. That's why there are so many disparities around the world. Large countries, developed countries have all the needs and necessities. They are able to get vaccinated. They are able to produce vaccines and get their population vaccinated. When in fact, we have lots of countries who have not even reached 5% of their population being vaccinated. Those large disparities exist because of the scale of footprint that we are living today on this planet Earth. And the resources that we are consuming, unfortunately, is already provoking resources beyond our capacity to sustain as a one planet. And how do we assess? That's where ecological footprint as an indicator comes into play. And behind it, it has its own methodology and approaches, definitely. I'm not going to go into the detail of those methodologies because by themselves they are complex, because there are variables, criteria for which we require data, and they are being assessed accordingly. To move on, certainly we have other types of tools. Down the line, you will see I'm mentioning about system assessment by fuzzy evaluation. So we've done what has happened. Among those tools, there are lots of tools today that are based on methodologies which relates to traditional methods of assessment in the form of quantitative mathematical assessment. And then, because of the complexities of obtaining data, of collecting and analyzing data, and the complexities of having data which doesn't exist, and the need for such data, today with time down the line, in the last 2 decades or so now, there have been tools which have been developed today, which takes into consideration the use of artificial intelligence techniques. So AI techniques, and could be in the form of fuzzy logic approach, could be in the form of neural networks approach as techniques within AI, which are being used to develop such type of tools. And among them, the last few ones which are listed there relates mainly toward the use of artificial intelligence techniques. The last one being adaptive neural fuzzy inference system, which is a tool, definitely, which is used to measure sustainability progress at sectorial level, even at country level. And all those tools now, they may be focusing on, some of them could potentially be focusing on the environmental dimension. Some could be focusing on the social dimension. Some of them could be focusing strictly on the economic dimension. And most of them could also be focusing on the 3 dimensions of sustainability. So such tools exist, definitely, and it depends on the need of those who are using them. So do we have challenges and implications? Yes. Using those tools requires expertise, so know-how. So at country level, for example, so those organizations at country level who collect the data to analyze and to understand and to measure progress, So today, for example, if you want to measure the progress towards SDG goals, achieving the 17 goals, for example, at country level, how each country are measuring their progress. So at least UN has understood the need for assessing alongside, and that's the main difference between what we used to have in MDG and what we are having in SDG today, where in each of those goals you have a series of indicators. But quite unfortunate, those series of indicators, it's up to the countries now. If you are measuring at country level, for example, it's up to the country, for example, to understand what are those data that are required for each of those indicators and whether they are collecting such data. If not, then we won't be able to measure our progress for each of those goals based on the indicators that have been set already within the SDG goals. And that's where the implications comes in, because of lack of data, lack of proper collection, lack of proper mechanism being set for proper data collection, lack of proper assessment and techniques and expertise required to properly analyze data, if at all are being collected, and to project accordingly. So I hope through these slides, I have shed lights when it comes to sustainability assessment, which is a whole field by itself, which is gaining momentum around the world. And certainly you as guys, as students, or potentially as researchers right now. So it's a vast area for venturing yourself in conducting research works. And I look forward definitely for anyone willing to extend partnerships and collaborations. We are here and we can collaborate. That's exactly what we are doing. To move towards achieving SDG goals cannot be done in isolation. It has to be done collectively. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I guess that we have finished this session. We only have lecturers, so we didn't have in plan any delegates. Are there any questions, any remarks, any comments?